Welcome to the Mr. Beacon podcast, and to repurpose the words of the late, great Edwin Starr and his song War, what is it good for? AI, what is it good for? That's what we answer this week in my interview with Curt Schacker, who is the co-founder of TrackVision. And they are doing something which I find fascinating with AI and has huge utility. And I think this approach and this application is something that a large number of us can benefit from, whether we are selling technology or implementing technology. One of the biggest headaches is the groundwork, the homework, the thing that we put off. How are we going to make this work? What are we going to apply it to? All of that data gathering is something that stands between us and all of the business benefits that you get from implementing technology, whether it's ambient IoT or anything else. TrackVision gave me the pleasure and the privilege of giving some early access to what they've developed. I thought it was amazing. I invited them on, and Curt is here to talk about it. Curt, welcome back to the Mr. Beacon podcast.
Thanks, Steve. It's great to be back again.
You've been on before, by my reckoning, or actually according to ambientChat, I was asking it earlier, it was about 2.5 years ago with TrackVision. You are a super interesting person in the industry, seen a lot, but I want to get an update on TrackVision and everything that you're learning about applying serialization and EPCIS, the GS1 standards. But the reason you're back is you showed me something the other day, just blew my mind around AI and the application of AI. And I think we're all trying to understand AI, what it can be used for, what it can't be used for, what the implications are. And sometimes it feels like a bit of a stretch connecting it to this sort of auto ID serialization thing. But I think there's deep synergies, tons of data. How do we get meaning out of the data? AI is really good at that.
Yeah.
But the thing that you showed me that just blew my mind was this thing which we all face as entrepreneurs or adopters of technology, which is, how do I get going quickly, and how do I get through all of the, if you'll pardon my French, BS, which is very necessary, which is like establishing what to do, how to do it. And your core product is this serialization platform, but you've developed something that helps people ingest, adopt, figure out what to do with it. Tell us what you've been working on.
Yeah. So, I think a good way to kind of approach the topic is just to take a moment to appreciate why supply chain traceability is so difficult. At one level, it's largely a data gathering exercise, right? It's the recording of events that happen in a supply chain, whether I'm shipping something or packing it or manufacturing or whatever. All of those are codified as events and capturable. There are standards that allow us to model those events in ways that make it easy for us to share that information. GS1 EPCIS is one of those. That's the one that TrackVision has adopted, in fact, founded the company around. But what makes it particularly difficult is that some of the information, or a lot of the information that you need to really deliver the type of data that's required to meet common business objectives, and we can talk about what some of those are, but some of that data resides with companies that we don't have any direct relationship with. There are supplier. And in fact, I would suggest that we often don't even know who those companies are. So we buy from these sort of successive series of middlemen, and eventually way upstream, there's somebody that's growing cotton, and that cotton is grown according to certain laws and certifications and so on. And if I, as a manufacturer, let's say of this Patagonia sweater that I'm wearing, need to make claims about that, how can I do that with veracity, with truthfulness and accountability, especially when, the government through vehicles like Digital Product Passport is requiring that I do so in order to sell this product in the EU. I mean, that's a tall order, right? And I think that's why there's so much of a struggle, and you're seeing kind of this tension between government and industry as to how do we get to the right answer where we want to be more transparent, we want to obviously do the right thing by consumers. At the same time, we're foisting this big task on brands and product manufacturers, and we just have to pause for a moment and appreciate the complexity of that problem. And I don't think we can, be short shrift about it. I think we have to, I mean, government has to acknowledge the challenge of that for businesses, handling the complexity and also the cost associated with it. And so, but we as technology providers can also be thinking about how we can make that problem a lot easier. And so what we've been working on at TrackVision is I guess you call it an AI agent, but really it's a collection of AI agents. There's about 18 of them right now that are involved in this process. And what it's doing is it's using information available to it to ascertain where the information likely is to be found that you need to disclose as part of a digital product passport, if we want to use that as the example right now. Where is that information likely to be found? Who has that information? How can you collect that information? And then how can you determine what gaps still remain after you've done that? And it's all an automated process. So you kind of unleash this AI agent sort of out into the world, and it starts this massive data gathering exercise. There's a finite number of companies that produce things. So if you're making this shirt that's composed of cotton, for example, that cotton was made by somebody, and AI ought to be able to make a pretty good guess at who's actually making that cotton. And it can use a lot of information to sort of draw those lines of connectivity between the brands and the originators of the raw materials that go into those products. And it turns out those educated guesses are actually pretty amazingly accurate. And so we facilitate that process, and it's really a paradigm change for how people are thinking about it today, which is, I've got to go talk to my supplier, and I have to ask them to talk to their supplier and get this information. I need it in this format, and sort of, trying to sort of manually traverse that chain back to source. And that very, very difficult way to approach the problem, especially when you consider, brands make thousands of SKUs, and those SKUs are coming from different factories around the world with different materials. I mean, it's just a very, very complex problem. So letting AI have a go at it, and seeing what it can come up with, and making your starting point sort of, instead of starting at zero and just kind of getting a team of whatever number of IT people together and have them get on the phones and emails and start figuring it all out. What if you could make really, really educated guesses, which AI is extremely good at doing, of course, and raise your starting point to be much, much further down the line, and just let you know what the gaps are in the information. So that's what we set out to do.
Who is the target for these tools? Who do you see using them?
It's really the end responsibility lies with the product manufacturer. So, the EU, again, just using DPP, but we could use lots of other examples, and they're not all compliance examples, but I think it's more under the header of transparency. I think it really resides with the company who the end customer sees as the brand. Right. So they're the ones that, I'm going into a store, I'm shopping for apparel. I see this Patagonia sweater, for example, and that's who I'm expecting to provide me the information. So they really bear the burden at the end. They're the ones the EU is holding responsible for disclosing this information. And so I think that's the starting point. So that's who we're marketing the tool to, is we provide you this agent. It's a chat interface, so you can go in, you can start asking questions, tell it about your products, or let it go find your products, because they're probably all on the web anyway. And it'll just build a product portfolio. It figures out what all the materials and ingredients are in those products, and then it starts making educated guesses about who probably provides those way up in the supply chain. and then we'll begin to ask those entities through an automated process of email solicitations just to say, hey, you're the supplier of such and such a material that I'm using in my product. I need you to tell me about that. So I'm claiming that it's all organic cotton. You're the cotton grower. I need you to provide me the certificate that you've been granted that proves that this is, all organic cotton. And you need to send that certificate to me. But there's no phone calls. There's no people involved in that at all. This is all just automation using the AI technology. So anyway, we're marketing it to brands and product manufacturers.
Which makes sense. And I think it's very important that what you're doing, and I wish you success. And to be frank, I hope that lots of companies copy what you're doing, and this turns into
Yeah.
a new competitive front, because I think this can make a huge difference. And, I think about the number of times where as a techie, I've heard about this new standard and there's regulations coming, and all companies that make clothes are going to have to conform to it. And then I've gone to people that work in those companies and they're like, oh, what are you doing about this? And they're like, oh, it may never happen. And they're not doing it.
Right.
And
Right.
it reminds me of me with paperwork and taxes and stuff like that. And I just hate that stuff. And I put it off and I'm like,
Right.
leave it to the
Yeah.
last moment. And then it becomes just a nightmare. And I
Right.
think corporations are kind of like that. It's like they're focused on getting people to buy their clothes. And then when they
Right.
hear about this regulation, it's like, well, yeah, we'll get to that. We'll see if we really need to do that. And this is where good initiatives go to die, because it's just too difficult to get started. And what I see is your tool is allowing people to do the right thing and actually get their taxes filed on time, metaphorically.
Yeah.
But doing it just faster, cheaper, better than they could ever do. So we've established these product companies, these manufacturers, these brands, but who within those companies do you see
Yeah.
has the problems that your tool set addresses?
I mean, it's really, I think it probably falls under, I mean, there are definitely, for example, compliance organizations within these big companies. They're always concerned about that, and they have people whose responsibility is, and the compliance lead will probably put together a team, and they might include folks from accounting and finance and maybe IT. And so they kind of build these ad hoc organizations to go after this huge data gathering exercise. But I want to come back to the point you make, because I think it's really well made. If you look at FSMA 204 for food safety, I know that's been a big focus of a lot of the work that you've done, and some of the many guests on your Mr. Beacon podcast. We just saw last year, I think it was in December, or maybe a little earlier, but they slipped the compliance date. We all know it had originally been January of this past year, or the current year we're in, 2026, and it was slipped to July of 2028, a 30-month slip. I mean, that's quite significant. Now, why would the FDA do that? I think what happened was they looked around and they said, well, there's 300,000 or 400,000 organizations in the United States and around the world who are responsible for demonstrating compliance with this legislation. And guess what? They're all going to be out of compliance. We can't go around. We will literally disrupt the entire food supply if we actually prosecute this issue, right? So, that just shows you the disconnect, I think, between the government, who clearly they want to do the right thing. And this is all very well intended, but you just can't throw out this huge raft of requirements onto business and just sort of expect them to fall in line, given the difficulty and the enormity of the task that you're asking them to undertake. And so I think predictably that's what we've seen. Now, will we see the same kinds of delay with DPP? I mean, I don't know. As I said, there's other legislations, there's other compliance, and there's just the general sense of more transparency is better. So how do we do that? But I think this kind of, I don't want to call it brute force, but really, if you think about the way people think about supply chains, is capturing these events on an event by event basis. And if I do that comprehensively, great. I get a full picture of my supply chain, but that means everybody in the chain has to participate, and they have to participate in the way that I want them to. And, I've been in conversations where I'm talking to, let's say, a manufacturer, and I'm telling them, well, you need to go get this information from so and so. And you also need to tell them to go to their suppliers and get information in the phone. I mean, it's like the telephone game, but on steroids. It's just, it's not very practical. Now it is for some companies who wield a lot of power over their supply chains. A lot of them can get people to fall in line, but it's just a really difficult thing to do. So our approach was to say, what if we could just step back and think about this incredible new tool we have called AI? And what if we brought that to bear on the problem? Because again, it's a data gathering exercise, and AI is really, really good at trying to figure out who has the data that I need. And it knows how to ask for that data. And I think if it's done in such a way that you're not making people sort of run a marathon, but spend a little time. I've got that information. I can respond to this email, and I can send you the thing you're asking for. I mean, that's not too much to ask of somebody that you're in business with. And it really is a paradigm shift. It's just a different way to think about the problem. And so I'm very encouraged. It's early days, but we've started to show it to some folks, including yourself. And we've gotten very, very positive feedback. So we think we're on a good track with it.
I mean, here's what I saw. I saw an opportunity to basically get projects going an order of magnitude faster, because it's complex when you're making products. There's a lot of companies involved, but also within a company, there's tons of departments involved. And what I can imagine is a VP of compliance at some food company or apparel company saying, "Oh, no, we really need to do this. Let me see if I can look good by using AI to do something and show that I can be efficient." And they call you up and they say, "Curt, come in here." And I can, what I saw was in an hour with that tool, with a company like yours, you could get done, which something would take months and months and months
Absolutely.
of work. And you're just assembling all of the stuff before you can start writing any code or plugging into any systems. You just kind of need to build the business goals. Here's the data. This is what we're doing. Here's why we have to do it. Talk to me a little bit more about the deliverables that the tool produces that people need. And these are the things that we need before we can start plugging in technology and charging people a monthly recurring service fee, and them getting all of the benefits of this amazing data for their customers and better marketing. And it's just like, before you get to do the implementation, you're spending a couple of years of doing this stuff, which is just mind-numbing, and the prospect of it evaporating and being distilled magically with AI is very exciting. So, what are the outputs from this tool?
Well, yeah, we've really tried to think of it as an end-to-end solution. And I think if you start at the very end, that's a good way to kind of think about it and build your way back. So ultimately what we want is we want a company to be able to put a QR code, a GS1 digital link compliant QR code, which is a web address, and a format that we all agree to according to the standard, and to put that QR code somewhere on their product in the form of a label or a sticker or on the packaging or wherever it might appear, for a consumer to be able to take out their smartphone with the camera app, scan that QR code, and get a raft of information, right? And what we want to do is we want to provide that information. That data is ultimately going to be served up in the form of some type of consumer experience through a mobile landing page. Again, if it's in DPP, then obviously we're going to provide that information in the form of a digital product passport. And if it's something else, we'll do it that way. But and the tool even includes a DPP page generator. So you've got all the information. Why not just use AI to help you build the landing page? That's pretty trivial step once you've got all the data, right? So it does that, and that's its final output, is an actual deployable mobile landing page with your DPP that has all the information that the legislation requires. And so that's what we want to, so that's sort of the evidence at the end of it that you've sort of job done, if you will. And everything else is the data gathering exercise up front. And so we're going in, we're looking at the entire product catalog, we're looking at everything that goes into every product that you make. And again, making these sort of highly educated guesses about what the supply chain for each of those looks like, identifies the gaps, gathers the information that's missing. And this is an ongoing process, right? So as you change suppliers, as you compose, new SKUs with different materials and so on and so forth, the tool just keeps iterating and doing that over and over again. So it's an ongoing kind of thing. And so really the deliverable is data, if you want to think about it that way. That data can reside in TrackVision, that data can reside in the company or the customer's own data repository, however they like to house that data. And then a set of APIs, of course, that can be used to retrieve that data to present in the form of a landing page or other business purposes. Obviously, internal business users could be using that for lots of other information. But I think most people tend to think of these not in all cases, but certainly in the DPP case, I think the driver is a consumer interacting with the product. You talked about serialization, which is another interesting aspect, because I think one of the things in the case of DPP that there's a lot of anticipation and curiosity around is sort of what is the fidelity of the identifier that will be on the end product. So there's really three choices. It can be at a SKU level, it can be at a batch level, or it can be at a serialized level. Obviously, the higher the fidelity of that identifier, the greater utility you get because you can provide much more granular information, which is great, but it also means that the amount of data that you need and the complexity of getting that data goes up commensurately as well. So I think a lot of people are really waiting to see for each of the delegated acts and under DPP for the different industries that they're addressing, what level of identifier will be required, because that's going to really have a lot to do with how difficult the problem is. I mean, one way would be to go the easy way. One extreme would be to go the easy way and just say, well, it's just a product SKU, which I would immediately question is, well, how valuable is that? Because that assumes that everything I make comes from one single static supply chain. All of the cotton and every shirt I make, all of that cotton comes from exactly one place in the world, because that's all I can say, right? With a SKU level identifier, right? If you go from there, you go to batch level. Now I can say, well, I make, these are two SKUs of the same shirt, but this batch came from cotton over here and this batch came with cotton over there. So I can do that with a batch level identifier. And of course, serialized identifier goes even one step beyond that. So in a way, you could position this as government could make it easy by saying, hey, we'll let you use these sort of really broad-based identifiers. But then if you go too far with that, then I would start to question the utility of it, because what information am I really getting that's useful to me if you're just telling me everything's the same, when in fact, I know it's not the same. You've got lots of suppliers around the world, and let's face it, they have different business practices and they're subject to different legislation in their own countries. And in order for the DPP to have teeth, I would suggest you've got to have that level of granularity. But in turn, that makes the problem much more complex, and therefore the need for a tool like the one that we've developed, I think, to be that much greater.
I love the way you introduce this simple way of dissecting or categorizing it. Is it, I'm going to just track where this particular model of hoodie comes from, or go down to the batch, or go down to the individual item? And it seems you made a really good case for it can't just be SKU level. Maybe you start there. Maybe pragmatically as a product company, you're like, well, if we show that we're doing it at SKU level, maybe they'll just get off our backs and give us a bit more time to do the really difficult thing. So I can see it as kind of a migration path.
Yeah.
You made a very good case for batch level.
Yeah.
What's the case from going from batch level to serialized level?
Well, there's certain use cases that you absolutely have to have a serialized identifier to be able to implement, and one of those is counterfeiting. So now I don't know that counterfeit will be included in the delegated act or not. Some form of counterfeit protection to protect consumers from buying something that they think is real when it's actually a fake and doing harm to them. We know that that's a massive, it's a multi-trillion-dollar global industry, faking products, of course. So it's really dangerous, and it would be natural enough, I think, for governments to want to protect consumers from that, that type of activity. Whether or not it will be specifically required in the DPP, I don't know, but I know brands care about it a lot. So, I mean, we can get into the technology if you want, but if you want to try to help a consumer ascertain whether a product that the individual product they're holding in their hand is actually a genuine product or not, you need a serialized identifier to do that. You need to be able to distinguish that individual item. And in fact, that alone is probably not enough these days. You need, often now, most brands are concluding that you need a second factor. So some type of, for example, copy-proof QR codes. There are technologies like that out there. And there's other methodologies that add layers of authentication to be able to make a high confidence determination about whether something is genuine or not. So that would be one use case. I think that that brands may, for their own purposes, decide to use a serialized identifier. I mean, if the government says you only need to use a batch and you use a serial, that nobody's going to have a problem with that. You can always go beyond what's required.
Yeah.
And I think gray market is another one. Gray market is this is parallel trade and moving, having authorized distributors of your product sell that product outside of their authorized territory or region. I don't know that it's a criminal violation, but it's certainly fraudulent. They're certainly in breach of their contracts when they do that. It's a form of stealing from the brand as far as I'm concerned. You're just arbitrating, market prices across regions and keeping the difference for yourself, right? So
Yeah.
I know brands want to clamp down on that. And again, you can't do that without a high fidelity identifier on the product.
That is, and it is a real problem, and it's a big problem. I think back to my Williot days, and I was visiting with one of the biggest brands that makes shampoos and that sort of thing, and they were saying that they have this rife problem, the pervasive problem, where they sell maybe this same product cheaper in Mexico, and they were finding that these products were showing up on the shelves of these stores, and these weren't like small stores. This was like pretty much the biggest retailer in the world was selling stuff that they had cut their margins, because you just can't make the same margins in Mexico that you can make in New York. And suddenly in New York, they're seeing their product show up, which has been sold the other side of the border. So this is a real problem, and it costs millions and millions of dollars. And it's essentially, someone somewhere is breaking the law, and you need the infrastructure to tackle it systematically.
It's a great use of, I think, of digital identification. I think it's a great use case. It stands on its own. Doesn't have to be driven by compliance. It hits the company's bottom line. They should have every motivation in the world. What I worry about sometimes with that class of problem is that companies have already built the problem into their business model. Do you know what I mean? Like, all of the results that they've ever reported have all essentially somehow acquiesced or acknowledged that problem is there. And so, if you're playing to market expectations, right, your investors or whomever, it's already baked into the numbers in a way. And so when you come to somebody and say, hey, listen, I can make this a lot better, sometimes you get these weird reactions like, well, that's not the thing keeping me up at night. I know it's a problem, but everybody knows it's always been a problem. You know what I mean? So it's odd human nature in that way. But companies certainly should not accept that. And it's an eminently pursuable problem now with the capabilities that we have, and more coming. Some really, really interesting technologies we've seen to help identify the locations of products and when they're in an area they're allowed to be and when they're not allowed to be. And I think companies are selling themselves short if they're not doing more to combat that issue.
Well, I want to, we're sort of inevitably covering both the core business track,
Yeah.
trace, serialization,
Right.
digital supply
Right.
chains, and the AI thing. So let's make sure we've buttoned up the AI thing, and then I want
Sure.
to put a bow on your core business and where you're
Hmm.
seeing it, the movement. So we've established that you've got this AI thing, which, if I'm like the VP of products or compliance, the benefit to me is, wow, you just freed up a massive part of my Outlook calendar. I can cancel all these meetings and I can bring the timescales of this product in. And so we understand who's got the problem. Hopefully, some of the deliverables have become clear. People should actually see your tool in action, because that's where you kind of go
Yeah.
from, AI, mumbo jumbo, to, oh, this is actually super useful. And
Yeah.
is there anything else that we need to talk about in this area before we go and do the last few bits of TrackVision update on the core
I
product?
mean, I think we've covered it. You make a good point, though. You got to kind of see it working. It all sounds a little bit vague and abstract when we just talk about it, with our words here. But I think when, I mean, like if somebody called me up and said, "Hey, Curt, sounds interesting. Let's have a meeting tomorrow and show us the tool." We would show them the tool on their own products. Now, we wouldn't cover the whole product line, but what we do is we just say, go pick 10 products that this company makes and execute the entire process. And we would give them a demo on their own products and identifying their actual real suppliers. And they can sit there and tell us how close we are or not. But what we found so far is that we're really, really close. And so that's how real it is. I mean, I think it really is an orders of magnitude in terms of the size of the team that you need, in terms of the time it's going to take. I think it really holds that kind of promise for this really sort of paradigm shift, and really making compliance attainable, and no longer being this kind of ugly word within industry of, oh my God, the government's now saying I got to do this, this, and this, and they've got enough of that already. I think we have a real shot at easing that burden in a massive way, which is why we're so excited about it and why I appreciate the opportunity to come on and talk about it. But I think seeing is believing, and these demos are, yeah, they're demos, but I mean, they're nothing's made up. It's your products, it's your suppliers, and I think that's what opens people's eyes, is when they see it on, working for them.
Well, the last point I want to make before we move on is it was an eye-opener to me seeing what you'd achieved in a remarkably short period of time with your engineering team. And you have just amazing engineers in TrackVision, and they cut their teeth on a couple of companies before looking at
Right.
this domain. But what it showed me, which I think is generally applicable, is, AI can write a ton of code rapidly, very, very rapidly.
Hmm.
But you're going to get the most out of it when you have people that have engineering discipline. They may not be writing the code anymore, but they kind of understand how the code should be written, and they
Hmm.
have deep domain expertise.
Yeah.
And so it's
Yeah.
not like my son, as much as I love him, is going to be able to do that, because he
Yeah.
doesn't understand the domain. He's not lived
Right.
with the people who are implementing it. He's not seen the problem. So
Yeah.
it's that. I think, at least for the next few years, we need people that understand how software and systems work and understand how they're applied, in order to harness these geniuses that can
Hmm.
produce 100 times more code than an individual person could. And fortunately, you've got that. So that's a compliment, but also I think it's kind of, to me, it was a bit of an insight as well. Let's go back to your core business, which is, you
Hmm.
have this incredible technology that uses the latest GS1 standard for track and trace. And, I think it's where the world's going to. What
Yeah.
parts of the world are moving fastest, and what are the use cases that are driving adoption of your core technology these days?
Well, so it's a very horizontal technology. I've always said, supply chain is, everybody's got a supply chain. And so at some level, everybody needs some type of a solution, depending on what their business issues are. But, it's not peculiar to any specific industry per se. So, I mean, we've got this You always want to say as a sort of a newer company, it's always great to be focused, and you try to be focused. But I mean, people are coming at us from the rail industry, from apparel, from fresh fruit, mining operations. It's sort of all over the map. And in one way, it sounds like, oh my gosh, you guys are really scattered. On the other hand, what we're providing to them is a standards-based traceability system. And, whether you're moving, grapes or lithium, doesn't really matter that much to the core functioning of the supply chain, right? So it's very, very broad, which is, I think, just an interesting observation. What's more useful, I think, is to talk about the use cases, because there you do start to see differences. And we've hit on some of them today, but I felt for a long time now that compliance in some ways is sort of the killer app for supply chain, because a lot of the others are kind of voluntary. They're do the right thing, kind of like, we should be more transparent. We should help people figure out whether the product is real or not. Yeah, we should let them know what all the ingredients are in a product and where those things came from, and that it's safe to consume. And if there's a recall, we should let them know right away that the product has been recalled. I mean, these are all the word should is in all of those things, right? The word must is in compliance. And there's
I
a
love
big
that.
difference between those two things.
Yeah.
So in a way, compliance can be the killer app. It's sort of the stick, if you will, rather than the carrot. But having said that, I think we have to go back to where we started, which is compliance has to be practically implementable. You can pass all the laws you want, but if nobody can practically comply with those laws, it's not going to do you a lot of good. And that's when I think you see these, I think, really damaging kinds of events, like slipping a deadline by 30 months, because it may not intend to do this, but in some ways, I think what it signals is the government isn't serious about it. Otherwise they wouldn't do that. And again, that may not be. I'm sure in the case of FSMA, that's not true. I know the government is very serious about food safety. Obviously, they are. But then why would they slip a legislation by 30? What would motivate that? And I think it's just because they realized that people were not going to be in compliance, either because they couldn't, or there are other issues. A lot of people feel sometimes like being traceable or being transparent is potentially going to disclose some trade secrets. I don't want to tell you all about my supply chain because that's my secret sauce. And I've seen some evidence of that. I've seen people just downright say, we're not going to do it, and let the government come and make us do it. I won't say names here, but you even see that kind of attitude. So, but I think if the government's being fair-minded about it, I think compliance is still a really, really important driver for industry. It has to be thoughtfully applied. It has to be practically achievable and implementable. And we're trying to do our bit to help with that, and I'm sure, many others are as well. But if I had to pick sort of one killer app, sort of killer use case across many industries, that's probably the one I would pick.
Yeah, makes sense. And it strikes me with Food Safety Modernization Act, the retailer is not disclosing necessarily where the product actually comes from. They're just allowing the government to figure that out super fast, so that people don't die.
Yeah. Right.
And
Yes.
that the withdrawal of product from shelves can be surgical rather than just every leaf of lettuce in the United States. But that's not necessarily true in Europe. In Europe, the idea, as I understand it, is you buy a battery and you can see where it came from. And are you seeing, have you seen any resolution to this problem of, I don't really make batteries. I know I've got a battery brand, but actually it's a bunch of companies in Japan that make the batteries, and I really don't want to show that. How are people coming to terms with that?
I think that's one of the real sticking points. Is there's a real tension there of people feeling like my supply chain is proprietary. It's a competitive advantage. I don't want people to know who my suppliers are, and that flies directly in the face of transparency. Now, this is this is the irresistible force meeting the the immovable object, right? So, something's got to give here. And
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm smart enough to predict, who's going to be the winner. I suspect ultimately government, having the final say on many things will be the winner, but there will have to be a reckoning. And I think there has to be an appreciation of how do if I'm going to claim, we'll stick with the cotton example because I've been using it our entire conversation. But if I'm going to claim that the cotton in this sweater is all organic, I don't necessarily have to tell you which organic farm in the world it came from, right? And I think that's a fair balance. So I'll give you the qualitative information that you're asking for, but I can't tell you who I'm getting that information from, or at least I can't disclose that widely to the public. Now, maybe under an audit with the government, I'll be more forthcoming with that information. Maybe there's a happy middle ground somewhere in there.
Yeah. I think my last question is, we see this very different approach in the United States versus Europe to regulation. Like, essentially, very little regulation here in the States. And
Yeah.
you have this whole DPP thing, which is like deep. And like, there's a lot of
Right.
categories of products, and the requirements are arduous.
Yeah.
Naively, I like to think, okay, government has got this stick, but actually, not only are consumers going to benefit, but hopefully the suppliers benefit as well, because they get out of the Stone Age and they start to implement this incredible supply chain technology that has all these secondary benefits. And yeah, they didn't want to do it, but they did it. And then suddenly, these European industries, or at least industries that supply Europe, because you have to comply even if you're in America and you're selling to Europe, are they? Do you see any evidence of people implementing these supply chain projects because they have to, but are actually getting other benefits out of doing the work?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's not a question of whether there's benefits. I think it's always a question of priorities. Every organization has more things on their plate than they can possibly do, and they've out of the 100 things they could do, they got to pick the 10 that they are going to do. But once you do that, you clearly do get benefits. I mean, there's massive amounts of research data that suggests that companies who are more transparent about their products gain more market share with consumers. Consumers have indicated very strongly that they will buy from brands who they trust, and part of trust is engendered through transparency. And if you put a QR code on your product and let me, the shopper, the buyer, scan that and get a raft of information versus the one on the next shelf over who isn't telling me anything, consumers have said loudly and clearly that they'll show a strong preference for the former. So I think there really is business benefit, but I think without sort of that extra kicker, some type of legislation, I think it's hard to prioritize. Doesn't mean it doesn't happen. It certainly does happen. But I think when you get the government sort of coming over the top and issuing requirements along those lines, then I think that, I think there's more motivation, clearly. It's another thing. I used to do a little work in security and security protocols. One of the things people never really, it was always hard to understand why people open sourced security technologies, security protocols, encryption protocols. Why is that open source? What are you doing? Isn't that the exact opposite of what you're trying to achieve? And in fact, what we all learned is that by open sourcing those technologies, you got everybody in the world looking at them, right? So everybody became everybody in the world, every developer in the world became your QA team.
Yeah.
Right. And so the flaws are found by these massive numbers of people who are looking at things and saying, oh, there's the flaw in your algorithm, right? And so it's sort of the sunlight theory, or the thousand eyeball theory, or whatever it is. And I think it's kind of the same. I think as we become more transparent and we require more transparency up and down the supply chain, we sort of shine a light on business practices. I think if our products are being sourced in areas where either laws are being disobeyed or there are cultural practices, I don't know, child labor or other kinds of sort of unappetizing business practices, I think supply chain transparency gives us a view into that. And I think that's information that we want to have. And So I think there's collateral benefit of standing up these business solutions, and I hope that's a lot of the good that will come out of it.
Yeah, it's nice to think that the work we do might actually be making the world a better place. Let's
Yeah,
hope so.
I think so.
Well, very good. I can't remember whether we discussed the latest tradition in the world of Mr. Beacon, which is to
Oh.
talk about for return guests. We talk about movies rather than
Oh,
music as part of the
okay.
warm up. But we could,
All
or you
right.
could choose 3 movies that have meaning for you that you like.
3 movies.
Are you a movie buff?
I'm not really movie buff, and I'm kind of a sentimentalist, actually. So, like, my go-to movies are things like It's a Wonderful Life, or, Shawshank Redemption, or The Family Man, which is kind of a derivative of It's a Wonderful Life. With Nicolas Cage and Téa Leoni. I watch with my family every year. Every year at Christmas, we've watched it, I don't know, a couple dozen times by now. Notting Hill.
Well, I was going to say, Love Actually is our Christmas movie, and which is
Right.
another Hugh Grant. Can't remember the name of the writer, but he's wonderful. Same
Yeah.
writer,
Yep.
just the best. It's great having a seasonal movie that you watch.
Yeah. We kind of do that, and we roll it out, and we all know it line by line now, and you could just, we could act it out ourselves, just just about. But I don't know. I love those kind of movies. I think, they sort of connect to the humanness in us, which maybe especially because I work in the technology world, where we're almost, sort of this, everything is logic based, right? And I suppose AI is trying to bridge that gap, right, between being human and being, being sort of logic driven. But anyway, yeah. So for me, those kind of movies are a break from that way of thinking, and maybe that's why I'm so drawn to them.
Yeah. Well, I think that's thought provoking. You got me thinking. I was talking to ambientChat, our AI tool, last night. We were at a Queen tribute band concert, and
Oh, cool.
the King of Queens, or the King of Queen rather, or the Kings of Queen. Let's get it right.
Kings of Queen. Yeah.
Amazing, tough audience,
Really?
a bunch of geriatrics like me, all sitting in comfy chairs. Auditorium wasn't full, and by the end of it, there were these grey-haired people headbanging with abandon. So
That's so cool.
and the Queen catalog is amazing. That's just like hit after hit after hit, and We Are the Champions, which I think our previous guest had on their favorite list.
Yeah.
Plus so many more. But they also did deep cuts, like there was a track called 39, which is, I think, off of Night at the Opera. And it's a country folk song, but on the surface, but it's actually a science fiction thing, because Brian May, the lead guitarist, is an astrophysicist. And
Right.
so I'm like asking ambientChat about that, and it is then relating that song back to the development of ambientChat, which is, so we have these like incredible meta conversations, and it's like, I just can't believe that this thing is relating a Queen deep track to the AI development work that, that we're doing. I'm not sure that it's a good thing, but it's certainly interesting.
Well, yeah, it is what it is. It's going to take its own course, and we'll all have to decide eventually whether it was good or not
We
good.
like it. I don't know.
Right.
Yeah, we just don't have any choice. We have to try and direct it in the right direction. Well, Curt,
Indeed.
thank you so much for coming on the podcast again. It's been great to have you, and I'm looking forward to next time.
Yeah. Likewise. Thank you.
Well, that was Curt. Amazing discussion. Love talking to that guy. And one of the things that we talked about was this really cool concert that I went to last night, the Kings of Queen, the tribute band for one of the world's best ever rock bands. So as is traditional, I am going to use that as the rationale for choosing Queen's A Night at the Opera as my album of the week. It's a stunning album. It was the breakout album for Queen that took them to major chart album success in the States and in the UK. And it's the one with Bohemian Rhapsody. So if you're thinking about an album that you want to buy, then it's one that you should certainly consider. But it has other great songs as well. One of my favorites is called You're My Best Friend, which was written by John Deacon, their rather unassuming, quiet bassist who's retired from public life now. But You're My Best Friend was actually written about his wife, and the lyrics are super touching. I'm not going to read them because I normally dissolve into tears when I do. But one of the most amazing openers for an album is Death on Two Legs. It is a rock symphony, and it's about their ex-manager. So these guys in Queen were almost penniless. They were literally living in bedsit, couldn't afford to buy a small house because their manager, allegedly, was keeping the money out of their pockets and in his. And so Death on Two Legs is dedicated to him. And what a way to say goodbye to a manager. I'm going to read some of the lyrics because they're just hilarious. So it opens with, "You suck my blood like a leech. You break the law and you preach. Screw my brain till it hurts. You've taken all my money and you want more." And it goes on. It's just so good. So good. Other songs of note are 39, which is a deep cut, which I actually played last night. And they introduced it as Queen's almost country song. Maybe folk would be a better description. But it was actually written by Brian May, their lead guitarist, who's also an astrophysicist. I think he's a PhD. And it's a science fiction song. So 39 is one to check out. Stream it or buy the vinyl. It's got a great cover, which features a brand that Queen used on the front of this album, on the front of A Day at the Races, which was the companion album. And Freddie Mercury designed it. And it's based on the star signs, animals whose star signs align with the band's star signs. And it's a great piece of graphics. So ahead of their time in terms of branding, and ahead of their time in many things. Although not in electronic music, this has the words "no synthesizers" in exclamation mark. They were very proud of not using synthesizers until they did start using them later on. But great album, great group. Thank you for joining me this week. Thanks to our sponsors who make this whole thing possible, to Bleakon and to Identiv, both great companies with great people. Thanks to Aaron Hammock for also making it possible by editing and publishing the episode. But most of all, thanks to you. You bring this meaning, and I love that we have this small community of folks that are really focused on making the world a bit better with this IoT technology, ambient IoT technology that we cover in a very broad manner. So until next week, stay safe and enjoy the journey. Thanks for watching this episode of the Mr. Beacon Ambient IoT podcast. You can also listen on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Please like and share this video and be sure to subscribe so you don't miss further episodes. For more information about our sponsors, head over to blecon.net, identiv.com, and ambientChat.ai.